Well, a woman's intuition and knowing is one of our God given gifts and superpowers. And don't let the world or any other voices tell you that that doesn't exist. Your inner knowing inside of you. It's so important. It is our compass.
Welcome to the One Girl Revolution podcast. It's your girl, Kate. On this week's episode of the One Girl Revolution podcast, I'm thrilled to welcome Shelly Denny, founder of the Medicine Wheel Ride, a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to elevating the stories and the voices of the murdered and missing Indigenous women and peoples. I have been following Shelly's journey and the Medicine Wheel Ride, I think pretty much since they began a few years ago. I reached out to Shelly a few years ago and we've gone back and forth for years, which is crazy to me. And we finally found the opportunity. We had the opportunity to sit down for this interview. As you know, I don't believe in coincidences, so I think that this must be the time that we needed to highlight Shelly and her incredible story. Shelly is a doctor of Oriental Medicine and works full-time as an acupuncturist. Shelly was born into a biker family in Minnesota. Her mother is Ojibway, her father is non-native. Shelly bounced in and out of the foster care system like so many Indigenous children, but throughout her life, she always stayed connected to her Native American heritage and her motorcycle family roots. Shelly's activism started in her teen years when she became involved in groups like Earth First, Food Not Bombs, the Catholic worker community, and Indigenous rights groups in various peace and justice issues. It was her form of rebellion, which I love, doing good and being a rebel. Shelly dealt with so many things throughout her life, and she ended up taking a break from direct action to work on her own internal healing of trauma and addiction and develop healthy and productive modes of coping with obstacles and difficulties. This groundwork of healing and recovery has really added a deeper level of resilience and commitment to service for Shelly. Shelly believes that there is great power in knowing exactly who you are and spiritual commitment that extends beyond mere faith. Shelly founded the Medicine Wheel Ride to bring together Indigenous women motorcyclists and allies to raise awareness, garner support and attention, and fundraise for the murdered and missing Indigenous women and relatives and the other issues facing the Indigenous communities. The Medicine Wheel Ride supports groups and advocates who search for missing persons and provides support services to women and their families. If you're not familiar with MMIW, or missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, I encourage you to listen to this episode, research, and do what you can to elevate this issue and support groups like the Medicine Wheel Ride. MMIW is a movement that advocates for the end of violence against Native women and their relatives. It also seeks to draw attention to the high rates of disappearances and murders of Native people, particularly women and girls. The MMIW movement exists because of the large number of Native women who go missing and are murdered each year compared to women from other groups. It's shocking. The statistics are shocking, and I encourage you to learn more. But in the meantime, I'm so honored to have Shelly on this episode to share her inspiring story and to talk about her incredible work. Here's my conversation with the amazing Shelly Denny. Shelly, welcome to the One Girl Revolution podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Kate.
I am so excited to have you on, and you're one of the stories that I have followed for years. I know we've emailed back and forth at different times, and like I was sharing with you the other day when we were talking on the phone, you just have always been on my heart, and I love the work that you do with Medicine Wheel Ride, so I'm so excited to cover your story and share about the incredible work that you're doing. And but I don't believe in coincidences. So I think that this is probably the timing that you were supposed to be on the podcast. And I just so admire everything that you're doing. So I'm so excited to have you on and to share all about the incredible work that you do. But Shelly, before we get into the work that you do, I would love to, with Medicine Wheel Ride, I know you do so many things. You're a woman of many talents, but I would love to rewind and hear a little bit about your own life, your own story, kind of if we could rewind to, where you're from and a little bit about your early life.
So I grew up in northern Minnesota. My mother is from Leech Lake Reservation. She's a member of the tribe there. I'm enrolled there also. My father is a non-native man and a biker. And so they met in the 70s and hit it off for a moment. And I came about. So I'm half Ojibwe, half non-native. I grew up in a non-native biker family in Duluth, Minnesota, and the Iron Range, all these small towns in northern Minnesota. Um, just in the last couple of years, I learned more about my mother's story, which is that when she was 14, her and her siblings were taken out of their home off the reservation and put into white orphanages and then white foster homes. And then somehow by that, when I came along, my parents split right away, and my mother did not end up with custody of me, and I ended up going through the foster system, getting into my raised by my father's family, and then back into the foster system again when I was 14. And so there's this repeating cycle of broken family and broken home that's happened in a lot of Native families and Native communities. So I have a kind of like unusual background, but also a not uncommon background too for a Native American person, of my generation. It was kind of crazy to learn about because I knew about this happening like abstractly to others. I knew about American and Canadian, like Indian child removal practices, boarding schools, and I knew all of that abstractly. But to see it in my own family story, my own personal story, was kind of like mind blowing.
Yeah, and I think I've started to see more, Shelly, and I know there's so much that we could possibly talk about because there's so many things facing the Indigenous community that people don't often talk about. But I have seen in recent years people starting to talk about even your own story, this, moving kids out of different situations and putting them in foster care. And there's so much that we need to be aware of, and we need to be talking about these situations because it is so important. I don't think I shared this with you, but my mom, we grew up in a community where it was like she wanted us to know about different cultures. And so even we're not Native, but we went to powwows and women's circles, and we were very involved in all of that here in Michigan. But then also, she wanted us to experience Mexican culture and all that. But at the heart of it too, she wanted us to know we're very Irish. So she wanted us to be connected to our own history and our own culture. And that's so important, so critical in the Indigenous community. For all of us need to know where we came from. And it's like a connector. How can you go on and live your life if you don't know where you came from? And so I think that your story is so important to talk about, to elevate this conversation.
Yeah, so true. It puts such a different depth and perspective on where you're going, knowing where you've been. And then also that where I've been is not an isolated experience that just happened to me. It's that I know it's happening to others. And then taking a look individually and collectively, how we can move forward together and help each other move forward together too, even cross-culturally in diverse cultural groups who've had similar experiences.
Yeah. Well, so growing up in the foster care system and kind of going through the journey that you did, how did you stay connected, or did you always feel that connecting point to your Indigenous sisters? I know your brothers and sisters, but did you always feel this like pull back to your own culture, or were in different situations where people helping you still connect back to your heritage?
There were some efforts. It's interesting because in northern Minnesota at that time was like a fairly racist place. And so the family I grew up in was Italian. So I would tell people I was Italian to try to like not have to deal with the discrimination of being a native kid, and try not to get too much of a suntan. And like I did all of these little things that I know other people did also. But I remember going to cultural camps when I was a child and a young teenager, and, making a dream catcher, making moccasins, learning some language, learning some traditional foods, just being with other natives, doing some ceremony, and a little bit of like cultural reclamation, which I think is really important because that really instilled some important seeds in me, even though it was just kind of peppered throughout my young life. It really stuck with me all of my life.
So, kind of moving into the work that you're doing now, and I loved reading your bio on your website because it was kind of about, how you were kind of this rebellion, but in the midst of it, a rebellious kid, but in the midst of it, you were like doing good. And it reminded me so much of my own life and my own journey. And so you found so many different ways to get involved and become an activist in Earth First and Food Not Bombs and the Catholic worker community. Many people would know Dorothy Day, and that she
Yeah.
founded that, and then different Indigenous rights groups. How did you kind of like, at what point, or was there a turning point where maybe it was when you were 18 and you were out of the foster care system, but at what point, or kind of how did you start getting involved in some of these groups and finding your purpose and power in that way?
I think I have always had like a sense of justice inside of me, and a sense of right, wrong, care, duty, responsibility, and I was really interested in freedom and learning that, freedom and the rights that I wanted to have also came with responsibilities. And I didn't like that so much, but I knew it was true. It felt really true. So, yeah, I was kind of a wild one as a teenager. I was really left to fend for myself, like quite a bit, with the help of like various different institutions and structures. And I did have my family too. Like I said, my dad was a biker, so I grew up in a motorcycle culture. I had, cousins and friends and siblings. Um, and I always found like being on a motorcycle such a freeing experience. I mean, there's just almost like no feeling like it in the world. So for me, that was always peace and it was always refuge. And it was always, this keep moving to the next thing, like get away from this thing, move to the next thing, and just have the wind, kind of blow some stress off my mind. And yeah, when I was 18, I also actually got sober when I was 18. So I had experimented with a lot of alcohol, drugs, like a lot of things that most um, kids who've been through what I've been through had done, kind of as a way to save my sanity. And then I hit the bottom with it and was able to like get sober when I was 18. And then I got into some activism, which I heard described as socially acceptable rebellion or socially productive rebellion, because there were so many things, with old growth trees, with homelessness, with hunger, with indigenous land rights, treaty rights. And I found community in those groups every single time. People bonded over a similar mission and a similar goal. And, that aspect in conjunction with the mission and the goal itself, just made me feel like I was a little bit less powerless in all of these big world things that were happening. And to what I've come to see now is, be a voice for the voiceless. And also to gather women and groups of people together to make a collective voice that can be heard louder than any single individual voice would be able to be heard.
It's so critical that we stand together and we support. I am a firm believer that we need to support our sisters. And I know that you're doing that through all the work that you're doing with MMIW and the Medicine Wheel Ride. And you kind of touched on a lot of different things that are facing our world. It's not just the Indigenous community, but we don't often talk about all the different things. And I know there's so many issues facing the Indigenous community, specifically, human trafficking, drug and alcohol addiction, domestic abuse, racism, and then of course the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And it's crazy when you start doing the research on it and finding, and I know myself, I started seeing different things pop up about MMIW and what is this, because we don't hear about it in the media as much as we should. And it's happening everywhere. And I know in Canada, it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue here in the States, across the country. And it's crazy to me that we're not talking about it. And your advocacy and all the great work that you're doing is really elevating this conversation. So I'd love to know, Shelly, like how did the medicine wheel ride come about? I know that you obviously love motorcycles and you talked about this, how it's freeing for you. And that was just kind of how you were raised in that community. And so how did you come up with this idea? And yeah, how did it come about?
So in 2018, I wanted to start a collective of Indigenous women who ride. There were starting to be more women motorcyclists, and I had been hanging out with some Indigenous men, but there were no other. I would be the only woman around on a motorcycle, and I was like, well, where is the visibility and representation for Indigenous women? Because I know they're out there, and I know they would want to connect with others if that was made an option. So I created a Facebook group. I created like a little club, and everybody showed up. I mean, it was a movement whose time has come. When something takes off like wildfire, you know that it is a movement whose time has come. And so by gathering all of these women together, hosting a weekly call, people were starting to share stories about their life. And some of those stories were about missing and murdered Indigenous people because it happens so frequently in Indian country. And there was a little girl who was missing, 4 years old, in the Four Corners area. And one of our sister riders wanted to gather people up and like help this family, bring them food, go on the search, like all of this immediate boots on the ground work and care and compassion to be there for the family. And in a subsequent phone call, she revealed that her daughter had gone missing and then was found murdered a couple of days later. All of these things, yeah, exactly, strike you right to the heart. And another woman had shared how she found out that a woman who'd been missing from her community, parts of that woman's body were found in a river 2 states away. And I was just like, oh my God, how can these crazy, horrible ways of dying happen to Indigenous women again and again and again, so frequently that we could talk about it every week on the phone? And so we decided to create an event, instead of just going to like all these motorcycle events recreationally, like I had planned just to build community. It was like, this is something that needs to be done. And when something is meant to happen, it will just come together. It was like the red carpet rolled open. And in some cases too, when something has a lot of benefit, there can be all of these obstacles that come up also. This is what my spiritual advisor tells me. Sometimes the to the degree of positivity your action can have will be the degree to like negativity and obstacles that can come up. So it's good to not talk about your plans as you're planning them and just like let things happen. And so when we did the first medicine wheel ride, there were riders all over the country, Hawaii, North Dakota, Florida, Texas, North Carolina, California, Canada. All of these women came together with the same intention to raise awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous people. And the original vision was the shape of a medicine wheel, which is a circle with like 4 quadrants in it. And the idea was to ride the shape of this symbol and sort of imprint it on Turtle Island, our homeland, as a safe place for us to be again. And the ride is meant to be, part awareness, public awareness, part prayer, and hopefully, part charity to raise resources in addition to awareness too. Money does not solve all problems, but money does save lives. Absolutely. It takes money to build public awareness campaigns. It takes money to search for people. It takes money to put up billboards, to pay for families to go to a trial if somebody should be, convicted for their crimes. So that happened in 2019. And there were so many people. It was a 12,000-mile route. And there were so many people who jumped in to participate, and so many people who said, oh, I would love to join you. I can't do it this year, but I will next year. And I was like, next year? What? And I was like, okay. And so, it's not just me. There's a collective team who is putting all of this together and participating and making this happen. The ride in 2019 was really amazing. It was pure grassroots. It was Indigenous led, but we also had a lot of really important non-Native riders and volunteers and supporters also. And that year we started our free social media accounts, free Instagram, free Facebook, to talk about who we were, what we were doing, where we were going, the communities we were riding through. And as the days wore on, the momentum and the visibility started to pick up, and the news was starting to show up to interview riders and to interview family stories. Families were starting to show up and talk about their stories. And I got the sense that a lot of these families, like something had happened in their family and they felt like it was them, not realizing like how prevalent this is, that it's happened to almost every Native family has this kind of story of a missing or murdered. If not one, it's two or three or four. And we're just talking about in the last couple, this generation, the previous, it going further, there's probably more going all the way back to 1492.
If you want to be a part of the revolution and support the work we're doing to uplift women's voices and their stories, please consider donating to our 501c3 nonprofit organization. Every dollar goes right back into the work that we're doing and will allow us to tell even more stories of inspiring women and girls to inspire and empower the next generation. Donate today at onegirlrevolution.com. That's the number onegirlrevolution.com. And it's one of those things that we don't hear about, but we're all connected to it. And I think it's one of those things once you hear about it or read about it. And that's why I was so excited to have you on this podcast, because we want to educate people. We want to elevate this conversation. And the second that people find out about it, they're like, wait, what? And then it's almost like you start pulling the thread and you're like, wait, this is happening here. This is happening in my state. This is happening. Like, who else do I know? And like you said, anybody who is in the Indigenous community, everyone has a story, unfortunately, to tell, and it's very personal. And we need to all do something. We can all speak up. We can all elevate the conversation. And I do love seeing in pop culture, Hilary Swank had this show, Alaska Daily, where they were digging into MMIW. And then I know there was an actress recently that used a red carpet event, and she elevated the conversation through what she wore. And there are these little percolating conversations. Of course, Killers of the Flower Moon with Lily Gladstone. These are elevating conversations, and we're starting to see the Indigenous community come to the forefront in pop culture even. And my hope is that these conversations continue to happen because, like you said, there are so many stories. And what's most heartbreaking to me as well, Shelly, is so many of these stories go unsolved. And so many of these families, first of all, like their daughter or whomever, family member, friend is missing. And sometimes they never find them. They never find the body, or maybe they find the body and then there's no way to know what happened. And so we need to elevate this conversation and support our sisters, but also support the Indigenous community, because I know there are also other people too that go missing or are murdered, and we need to elevate this conversation, and the work that you're doing is doing that.
Yeah, same with you, elevating this conversation. Like, thank you so much. It is about everybody. I mean, these are our, maybe physical blood sisters, but these are our neighbors, our community members, our coworkers, our people, our fellow citizens, our fellow human citizens. And we all need to care about what's happening to each other and put a stop to it. Stop to missing, stop to unsolved murders. So in the 2019 ride, one of the amazing things that happened was a family came to speak at one of the events. It was on the news, and then the law enforcement contacted that family afterwards to tell them that they were going to reopen their 30-year-old cold case file. Yeah, after 30 years of nothing,
Wow.
No answer, no lead, no trail. That was amazing. And we have all been learning a lot along the way also, learning like all of these things that I've mentioned already. And so have you, like the foster care issue, the boarding school issue, the land issue, the substance abuse issue, the trafficking issue, domestic violence. All of these things are contributors to the MMIW crisis, in addition to jurisdictional issues, because there's federal law, tribal law, state law, those jurisdictions, and one people saying no, this is our case, and another saying no, this is your jurisdiction, and just even pointing that out to the fact that it becomes important enough to legislators, lawmakers, decision makers to say we need to change the way information is shared. We need to create more avenues of communication and data sharing so that these cases can be solved and not just fall by the wayside and not matter. Because we do matter. Indigenous people, we are still here. We are still trying to thrive and rebuild our cultures, which is when I mentioned that culture camp I attended as a kid. And I think this is a really important way that the coming generation and our future is our own healing methods are embedded in those cultural stories, in those cultural ways of doing things. And you can't take all of that stuff away from a people and then a generation or two later be like, why don't you all have your shit together? Which is, I hear a lot of blame the victim. Oh, she shouldn't have been there. Oh, she shouldn't have been doing this. And you got to look at who you hang out with. And all of this blaming the victim without looking at all of the systemic and societal happenings that have led like a funnel to just this place for these kind of vulnerable situations to come right into Indian country.
Yeah, and there are so many things that we can do. I'm actually thinking about another woman that we had on the podcast, and she is a survivor of sexual assault as a teenager, and she got that where it was like, oh, you shouldn't have been there, you shouldn't have done that, and there is so much victim blaming, but she ended up going on and she found her power through a self-defense class. And she like regained who she was. And she was like, now I know my power as a woman. And she founded a nonprofit organization called SassGo, where they teach little girls and adult women of all ages, really, girls and women, how to defend themselves. And it's different from that cultural connection. And I think that was so powerful what you shared about like, yes, we need to be connected to our culture and our heritage in order to heal those wounds throughout our generations, right? We can sometimes choose to move on from a wound that was there from our parents or our grandparents, but we really need to be connected to our heritage and our culture in order to heal. But I just thought of Shannon Henry's story because like I loved that she took this moment where many people saw her as a victim, and she was like, I'm going to use this opportunity to help other women and girls. And I know that there are so many women like yourself who are standing up and speaking up for their sisters and really elevating this conversation because we can all do something, right, Shelly? And like, I think about even with the power of social media, so many people on social media are like, I love the documentary series where they're like, oh yeah, everybody on this Facebook group got together and they reviewed the police records or they reviewed things and they were solving crimes. And I'm like, on this issue, why can't we do that? Like in this day and age with technology and everything, like we should be going through and being like, all right, MMIW, these are the cases that are going on. Let's join forces and find ways to solve these crimes, even just as a people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And some of that is happening through social media awareness. One of the families we met is the family of a young woman named Jamie Yazzie, who went missing, I believe it was 2019, like June, July of 2019. And then in 2020 was when the medicine wheel ride, we created our first ride in Sturgis, South Dakota, which is the largest motorcycle event in America. And it's a couple thousand miles from Phoenix. But anyway, as we were riding, from where I live, like here to Sturgis, South Dakota for this ride, we met a lot of families along the way to try to make these community connections. And we met the family and they had wanted T-shirts with her picture on it. And they said the local printer wouldn't print somebody's photo without their permission. And they're like, well, she's a missing person. This is why we want it. She can't give permission. And so I was like, okay, we're going to get you these shirts. And stayed in touch with the family. And so several members of our group have become very close with this family. and been able to see something that doesn't happen very often, which is that, we got them the shirts and then a missing persons billboard. The family was inspired. They had made a reward if anybody had information. And then they became inspired by this group of advocates coming in to listen and support them. And they were able to increase their reward. And then we have a lawyer, Darlene Gomez, who does a lot of pro bono work for MMIW. She got involved to help them also. And she got on the FBI and they increased their reward also for information, leading to, finding Jamie and the conviction of her, eventually would be her killer. And after 4-5 years, that finally happened, just in the last few months, where her ex-boyfriend, went on trial, and other women who'd been assaulted by him also went onto the witness stand, and he was convicted in the murder of Jamie Yazzie. And her family is able to get some sense of justice. Sometimes I want to say they get justice or they get closure, but I don't know. I don't really know what they feel or how that comes about. And I don't know if you ever fully get it if your family has been through something like that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
such a loaded question, and I think that's an important thing. But even just to know, there are so many cases that go unsolved, and it's also at times I know that there are stories too of someone who's been a perpetrator multiple times, right? And so if that person isn't stopped, they'll continue to do it, and that happens a lot in MMIW, and that's what different cases have shown. I mean, even that guy, that he had been a perpetrator in multiple occasions, and you think about maybe it gives the family a little peace to know that their journey was able to help other people, to stop this from happening to others.
That's so true. Yeah, I've seen that a lot in a lot of communities where it's like everybody knows who did it and no one can do anything about it. And there's not enough pressure put on also. And public pressure really does go a long way. You may think like your post on Facebook isn't doing much, but it is adding to the public awareness and the public pressure. Finding a community group, showing up to any of the events that are happening. So this is a great time to talk about this because today is April 26th, and May 5th is the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous People. It is named that after Hannah Harris, who was a Northern Cheyenne girl who was murdered on her reservation some years ago. And her mother and the help of advocates worked really hard to get some justice for her and also to create an ongoing national awareness campaign for missing and murdered Indigenous people because it wasn't talked about and it hadn't made it to really the national radar yet. So that's on May 5th, the National Day of Awareness. But now there's what's called the National Week of Action for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives. And that's starting April 29th. And the NIWRC, which is the National Indigenous Women's Resource Council out of Montana, they do amazing work. They have created an action plan for the National Week of Action for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives. So it's on their website. They have a toolkit, a social media toolkit that's really easy to share. And we will be sharing that also on the Medicine Wheel Rides Facebook and Instagram page because people do always want to know, well, what can I do? First of all, tune in, listen, hear the stories from the families. And not every family wants to tell their story, and that's fine. Every survivor, which I am too, and I don't talk about it much because I don't believe that survivors, we don't owe everybody our story and we don't owe everybody our pain. And there was times in my life when I needed to say every detail to everyone. And then there just became a time when I was finally done talking about it. And I think that there's a cycle people go through and it's totally fine. And so there are a lot of things people can do to support. So listen to the stories, listen to the advocates, click on a story when you see it in social media. It lets that media source know that these are stories that people want to read. And that's important to engage in content like that. And when you hear these stories, you in your heart will find something open. And, in the 5 or 6 years I've been doing this, I mean, I can tell you my heart has been broken open a million times. And then from that is born another sense of compassion and drive. And, oh, we can do this together. And, being a group of women on motorcyclists, it draws a particular kind of like, attention. And I think it's a great way to draw awareness while also receiving like that, just the healing energy that being on a motorcycle can be. And sometimes people come up to us and say, "Oh, I like what you're doing. I love what you're doing. I respect what you're doing. What you guys." And I mean, my answer really to that is that you are us too. We are just women, And yes, I grew up in a biker family, so I know how to ride a motorcycle and talk about things. But everybody has something. People are doing walks, horse rides, 5Ks, putting on local events, just making a monthly donation to an organization that's doing something. So we have donors that give $5 a month or $10 a month or $20 a month, or once in a while there'll be like, a bigger donation. But all of that money that the medicine wheel ride is taking in has been used to support families. Like I said before, in their searches or in recovery. We've gotten letters from families saying, "Thank you so much for your help. We were able to go get my relative, rescue her from a pimp, um, you know, get her off of whatever drugs." This is the trafficking cycle, is to lure people in and get them hooked on drugs, and they're out of it. They're losing their own agency and ability to make decisions, and it can be hard to recover people from that. But this family said, because of your help, we were able to get her. She was able to come home and spend even the last days with the grandmother before the grandmother passed away, and just really heal some family story like that.
Mm.
And there was a woman I met at an MMIW event on May 5th a few years ago. She runs a trafficking recovery house, I guess, for people who are rescued or recovering from the trafficking scene. And told me, like, it's not always like this insidious thing that maybe we've thought it was, like this Hollywood version. That trafficking really happens by your boyfriend telling you, "Oh, you just need to do this for this guy or with this guy, and then we're going to have this," and then coercing and forcing women into doing things like that. Or when young women are going to college for the first time, you think you're going to go have this great experience. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to be the first one in my family. And then some fake friend is said, "Oh, you know what? I know this guy. You just go on a date with him, and then you're going to get your books paid for, or they're going to pay this or that." And they end up lured into a dark cycle of trafficking, like campus trafficking. And then there comes all this shame, and it's hard for people to walk out of that. So I have learned so much just by putting myself out there and being willing to listen, being willing to learn and try to carry on people's stories with the most respect, honor, and compassion, and commitment to do something that I can.
Well, you're doing so much and you're such an inspiration to all of us. And we'll be sure to be promoting, obviously, on May 5th, but throughout the year, and really providing these resources for our listeners as well. I'll put it all in the show notes as well so people can easily get in touch. And I think it's so important for us to think about, we all have time, talent, and treasure at different points in our lives, right? Like maybe right now you don't have the money to donate, but what can you do? How can you use your social media? How can you just elevate the conversation amongst your family and friends? If you're listening to this right now, share this episode with your family and friends just to get a little bit of a taste of what's going on, and to hear from you, Shelly, and all the great work that you're doing. And it's so important for us to really encourage to be educated, right? To be educated on the issue as much as we can. Once you know, you can't unknow it, you can't unsee it. And so it's so important for us to elevate that conversation and to get involved and support our sisters. The One Girl Revolution podcast is all about supporting other women and girls who are doing incredible things. And these missing and murdered Indigenous women, we need to be their voice, because right now they're the voiceless, and they're a forgotten about population at times when we don't see the media covering it. And I think what you're doing with the medicine wheel ride and elevating this conversation and promoting this topic in the world is so critical. And so I want to ask you, what's coming up for the Medicine Wheel Ride? Fill me in on all the great things that you guys have going on.
So, still some of our usual activity. We have the annual ride in Sturgis, which always happens on the first Sunday of the Sturgis Rally, which is August 4th this year. And we start at Bear Butte, which is the sacred mountain in Sturgis. And we'll take a ride together, have a little program, and do some, community building, awareness building, fun together. And there's going to be a fundraiser that night in Deadwood with a couple podcasters called Two Lane Life. They're going to be doing a fundraiser and amplifying our voice to their audience. So that is August 4th. The week after that in Montana, there's a Indian motorcycle rally, and the group of guys there are putting on a ride during Crow Fair. And there will be a Medicine Wheel Ride fundraiser happening then, a ride and fundraiser. There was a documentary made a couple of years ago about some of the Medicine Wheel Ride's work. The documentary is called We Ride for Her. It's actually playing in San Luis Obispo this weekend at their film festival, but it's going to be doing the film festival circuit. And people can make a request to have that film. It's 18 minutes long, so it's a short. People can make a request to have that film shown in their community, whatever that be. If it's a women's club, if it's a healthcare center, if it's a Native center, whatever, it's your group you want to have that shown, you can contact We Ride for Her in the team, and they will help to make that happen. It's a really great awareness tool to catch a little story and some insight onto what we do. Oh, what else? We have an Etsy store if people want to buy some of our merchandise. All of that money is funding our activities and the family support. It's Medicine Wheel Ride on Etsy, Instagram, and Facebook. We're continuing to, be available when people want to tell us their story or have us amplify their story. Continuing to ride into more communities and help as many people as we can, and hopefully inspire people too. So there are other women putting on motorcycle rides in their community too. Here in Phoenix during Arizona Bike Week, we have Thunderbird Throttle, which is an MMIP awareness fundraiser for the Phoenix Indian Center Youth Council. I'm going to be going to Calgary in June for the MMIP Spirit Ride put on there by Cheryl Wood. There are so many things that happen kind of last minute notice also, because some of this work is really, I think, guided by the spirit world. It's spirit world work. And pretty soon all of these circumstances come and it's just time to take action. And we will put that out there. And if you're in the neighborhood, everyone is always welcome to join everything we're doing. Although we are Indigenous led, everybody is truly welcome. Our allies and our non-Native friends are extremely important. You all have connections and networks and can open doors for us to walk through that we wouldn't be able to do on our own, or it would just take us so much longer to get there. And so our allies are extremely important. And I think for one of the things also you had asked me is like, what do I want people to know about the Indigenous community? And it's important to know too that in North America, in the United States anyway, there are 574 tribes, federally recognized tribes. So we're not like one homogenous group. Like there's all these myths about Indian people, like, don't you have a lot of money already? Don't you get this for free? Oh, aren't you all very poor? There's like all of these ideas. No, because we're not one homogenous group, really. We here 574 tribes, and then adding Canada, we're talking like 1,000 communities. Of course, there's similarities, but we are all not just one and the same. Despite that, though, we are facing some of the same issues. And then we have to ask our question, why? Why does the same thing keep happening in all of these different communities?
Watch One Girl Revolution's Emmy-nominated short documentary, The Girl Inside, on our YouTube channel or at onegirlrevolution.com. The Girl Inside features a poignant look at the stories of incarcerated women within Cook County Jail and a life-changing academic course taught by Dr. Laura Biaggi called Storytelling as a Healing Art. This short documentary reunites Dr. Biaggi with 5 of her former students for a special one-day course on the transformative power of our stories and our voices. And what is revealed is the girl inside. Watch the Emmy-nominated short documentary The Girl Inside today on YouTube or at onegirlrevolution.com. We all need to do what we can to elevate the conversation and just be educated and know what's going on. And you know, you shared about all the different Indigenous communities. I would say for everybody who's listening, look up what communities are in, what tribes are in your own local area or in your own state, and figure out what can we do to elevate the conversation. And I love that you shared about the documentary, because that's an easy thing, just to get that to your local school or your local women's group, or just to elevate the conversation, because it's so important for us to do whatever we can. And I can't wait to continue to follow everything that you're doing, Shelly. And I know that everybody who's listening is going to want to support everything that you're doing. And I always say that the free and easy way for people to support organizations like yours is just to follow on social media. And as you see things that pop up, you know, even on May 5th, make sure that you share. And when the medicine wheel ride happens, like posting about that, we can all do something. And if you don't have social media, you know, email it around to your friends or text it around or text this episode out, because we can all do something. Shelly, I'm so curious because, you know, your story obviously influences why you care so much, right? Why you care so much about your sisters. But I'm so curious if you could get to the very root of why you do what you do every single day, why you're invested so heavily in the medicine wheel ride and the work that you're doing. What would you say that that root is? Because I think about, there are some really, I'm sure there are really joyous days, and especially when you're out riding and it's so freeing and you don't feel the weight of the world on your shoulders. But I know that there are also dark days where you hear these horrific stories, or you're walking with different families and hearing from them, but you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and you keep doing the work that you're doing. What would you say the root of that is?
You know, I think the root of that for me is that I was born for this. It is a calling. And I could grasp at every kind of reason why, you know, because I'm a survivor, because I grew up with trafficking around me in my household, because I have seen things, because I've heard stories. I'm also an alternative medicine doctor for many years now, and I've heard a lot of personal stories there. But everybody who's a survivor doesn't go into advocacy and like turning all their free time into trying to do something. And everybody who has been affected, you know, doesn't do that. They don't need to. They have other callings and other things to do. On one hand, I think it's compassion. On another hand, I think it's, I've been there. And after meeting families in the first year or two, the first year, I realized that what advocates are doing, I think, is really answering a prayer that has been put out there by families wishing someone would do something. And we can all have that feeling, I wish someone would do something. And I remember having that feeling when I was a kid, or I was a child, or I was in a dangerous situation, thinking, I wish someone could do something. And then as I've grown up, you know, there's, I think I made a decision at some point in time to be the kind of person I needed when I was young. And so all of that has, you know, helped me become who I am. And I have to take breaks sometimes and pull back and just be like, okay, I need to not try to fix the world for a moment, and regain my center and let that come off of me a little bit. But I really can't do it for long, because it's such a strong drive in me personally. And I think other people are doing other things. You know, maybe they are mothering, or they have their family, or they have another kind of community work, you know, that they're doing, or whatever your capacity is. But for me, I think I was just born for this. And, you know, coming back around to what Dorothy Day said, which you mentioned, the Catholic worker community. And one of the things she said was, don't call me a saint, because anyone can do what I'm doing.
Doesn't that just like hit you to your core when you hear that? Because it's the reality is we can all do something. And
Mhm.
so often we talk ourselves out of it, like, oh, I don't have the time, or I don't have the money, or I just can't, right? We talk ourselves out of doing good. And the reality is we can all do something. And I love, yeah, Dorothy Day is
Yeah.
such a beacon of light because she's a reminder of that. And so are you, that
And
we can all do something.
and yes, we can all do something. And just because you don't see how it's going to work, but if you have that pull inside of you, you just have to follow that on faith and know that you're not being pulled into wanting to do something for no reason, that something is pulling you, whether it be the spirit world, guides, whatever you want to call it. That's part of an interdependence to make something happen. And you just start to follow that first thing, and the next step will appear, and the next, and the next. And it can be mind blowing what happens when you think, I don't know how to do it, but just show up anyway. And you learn along the way, and you learn with others along the way. And if it doesn't work out, that is okay too. Maybe you met somebody along the way, and in the future, you'll do something else along the way, which could be said about the medicine wheel ride. This isn't what I set out to do in 2018, but this is what happened because I never gave up when any kind of obstacles came on. Just keep moving forward and go with the people who are going with you.
I love
And
what
more
you
will come.
okay. I love what you shared earlier just about not trying to control things, like let the spirit just move things. You have an idea, and that's another thing. We all try to just control it and like I can do this when I have the perfect plan. But in
Mm.
reality, you just kind of have to do it. Like as Nike says, just do it and then let it become what it's supposed to be. And I know that that's your own journey. That's your own, we're always becoming, we as individual people are always becoming who we were created to be, but also these ideas that we have. I know that the medicine wheel ride is still growing and evolving and will forever. You know, every single year, every single person you encounter is helping grow the mission and help you to see more clearly the power of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and now the Medicine Wheel Ride is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which is making it easier for us to get corporations and people to sponsor what we're doing and be part of this movement with us. I think a really important book for people to read is called Decolonizing Wealth. And it's written by the guy who started Native Americans in Philanthropy. There's a lot of ways that philanthropy misses the mark. It's aiming for what it wants to go for, but still kind of missing. And Indigenous people, although we make up, 2% of the population, less than 0.1 of philanthropy is directed to Indian country. So this is a little bit of my goal too, to create some awareness about that too. Like we're here to with our own solutions to what we see going on in our communities. And we want the support of people and corporations who've been able to benefit from what they have here on our land, all of the resources and the industries and everything that has came about. And I know that a lot of people, have a lot of money and resources, and they want to do good things with it. And there are a lot of ways to put that back into grassroots hands, people who are rebuilding communities. And so, Decolonizing Wealth is a really great book to read.
It's so great that you mentioned corporations because also sometimes people have a business or they have a job where they're able to allocate resources or give funds, or sometimes, sponsor a particular product. And then I know you mentioned before the Etsy shop that people can buy things from that. So I will be sure to put the links there. People can donate, people can follow you on social media. I will put all of the links in the show notes so people can easily follow what you're doing, support what you're doing. I can't wait to continue to follow and support everything that you're doing. But Shelly, before I let you go, I always end this podcast on 2 questions. And so I'm reflecting on you, what a one girl revolution you are. And I know that with every one girl revolution, there is also an army of women that walk alongside them who have, women who have walked in front of us, who have laid the path for us, women who are walking alongside of us, and then also generations to come, that they're going to hopefully, fingers crossed, they're going to follow in our footsteps because we're really trying to lay the foundation for them, for the up and coming generations. But who is a one girl revolution in your life? Who is a woman or girl that inspires you?
I have I have a Buddhist spiritual advisor who taught me some meditation about 20 years ago. And in these meditations, in a 5-minute meditation, I was able to dissolve years of anger. I was able to have it transform from anger and judgment to compassion and love. And when I watch the way she teaches and the way she leads and her patience, her belief in the innate good in people, I'm truly inspired by that. And to watch what she is able to build and lead and get people to see in themselves, including me, what how she's led me to see like any of the paradigms I was living in on my own self-concept of what I could and could not do were not ultimately real. And that through these meditation practices, through opening my heart, through developing compassion, I was going to gain more access to the limitless wisdom and compassion that is in me and every being, every person, if you do these practices. And from that well of compassion and wisdom that's in there, all things are possible. I can get really like frantic and caught up and da 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 da. But when I like calm and let that go and get back to my heart, to peaceful center, to why I really do what I do, I can feel that all things are possible and we can move forward. And sometimes it's miles at a time and sometimes it's inches.
We did a documentary, One Girl Revolution did a documentary called The Girl Inside, and we actually took a film crew into Cook County Jail in Chicago and interviewed 5 women within Cook County Jail. But there's a professor that taught a storytelling class. And one thing I always remember what she says it in the documentary, but she talked about how we always need to quiet the voices in our heads, in our own lives, in order to figure out like who we are, but also where we're supposed to go. And so that just resonates with me. What you're sharing is just like finding those moments to really quiet those voices, whatever that looks like, meditation, but just even being present. This world is so busy and there's so much so much noise when I think about it, social media and the news and all the different things that we're involved in. And so it's so important for us to just quiet those voices and spend time just with ourselves.
Yeah, the answers are in there. The direction is in there. So I know when I think I know how it's supposed to go, when I think I know how it's supposed to work, when I think I know we're gonna do it this way, it can actually create more difficulties than letting go a little bit, like checking in spiritually to the heart, the quiet place that is the inner voice and the inner guidance system. That is what we're really here to move from, that place. I mean, and as an Ojibwe person, it's like it's my obligation to believe that. It's my obligation to move with that, to listen to that, connect with it, and trust it.
Shelly, I could just spend all day hanging out with you. I just so admire you and everything that you stand for and everything that you're doing. And I can't wait to continue to follow everything that you're doing and support in any way that we possibly can here at One Girl Revolution. But before I let you go, I always end this podcast on one question. So I'd like to ask you, if you could leave women and girls around the world with one message, what would it be?
Oh, one message. Well, a woman's intuition and knowing is one of our God-given gifts and superpowers. And don't let the world or any other voices tell you that that doesn't exist. Your inner knowing inside of you. It's so important. It is our compass.
Shelly, thank you so much for just being such a beacon of light. And thank you for being on the One Girl Revolution. And thank you for all the incredible work that you do.
Thank you, Kate, for everything you do, for the invitation. And I just wish you the best in all of this amazing work you're doing to make the world a better, brighter, safer place. Thank you
Oh,
so much.
thank you so much. And I feel a collaboration, girl. I think at some point, one girl is going to have to come on one of these rides or do
Oh,
something
yeah.
with you. So
Love that. Yes.
Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at One Girl Revo. That's the number one girl REVO. And you can find more information on One Girl Revolution at onegirlrevolution.com. That's the number one girlrevolution.com.